Look at this airplane. Every red dot is a bullet hole on a plane that came home. The military looked at this pattern and said, armor the planes where the holes are. That seems obvious. That seems careful. That seems like data-driven thinking. It was exactly dangerously wrong. And the same mistake, the same kind of mistake with the same shape is quietly running your career, your investments, your relationships, and the advice you're going to take tomorrow. The people who write the books you buy can't see it. The people who give the TED talks can't see it. And until the end of this video, neither could you. We're going to find the missing planes. Once you can see them, every success story you've ever heard rearranges itself. And you're not going to be able to put it back. There's a thought you probably hold somewhere underneath the day-to-day. It goes like this: if I study what worked, I'll learn what works. If I read the founder's autobiography, I'll know how to build a company. If I watch the morning routine of someone in great shape, I'll know how to get in shape. If I listen to 10 podcasts with millionaires, I'll find the pattern. If I find the people who pulled it off, I can reverse engineer what they did. This is not a stupid belief. It is, in fact, the oldest belief in the entire human toolkit. 300,000 years of ancestors got better at staying alive by watching what worked and copying it. The hunter who came back with meat, copy what he did. The berry that didn't kill someone, eat that one. Your brain is running ancient, beautifully optimized software. The whole thing is built to learn from outcomes you can see. Hold that. I want you to remember that your brain is doing exactly the thing it was selected to do. We're going to come back to it. It's going to matter more by the end of this video than anything else I say. But here's the question that's going to break the software. The hunter who came back okay. What about the hunter who didn't? In A Tribe of 40, when you watched the survivor and copied his hunting style, you also implicitly watched everyone else who tried that style and survived. You knew them. You buried them. The data set was complete. That's not the world you live in anymore. The world you live in has a problem with the missing hunters. And the man who first saw the problem clearly was named Abraham Wald. World War II. Allied bombers are getting shredded over Europe, and the military has a problem. Planes are heavy. Fuel is precious. You can't armor everything. Extra metal means less range, less payload, more weight. So they do what feels obvious. They study the bombers that come back. They map every bullet hole on every returning plane. The pattern is clear. Holes everywhere on the wings, the tail, the fuselage. Almost nothing on the engines or the cockpit. So the conclusion is easy. Armor the wings. Armor the tail. That's where the bullets are landing. Then, working at Columbia University's Statistical Research Group in a series of memoranda in 1943, a mathematician named Abraham Wald looks at the exact same data and says something that changes how the entire 20th century thinks about evidence. He says, you're looking at the wrong planes. The bullet holes you're mapping, all those red dots on the wings and the tail, those are the holes a bomber can survive. The clean areas, the engines, and the cockpit, those aren't safe spots. Those are the places where, when a bullet lands there, the plane doesn't come home to be measured at all. The armor needs to go where there are no holes. Wald was right. The military reinforced the engines and the cockpit. Thousands of pilots came home who otherwise would not have. And in the process, Wald named, quietly, by accident, in a stack of internal memos no one outside the military read for decades, the most important error in your entire decision-making toolkit. Survivorship bias. The systematic mistake of drawing conclusions from cases that survived a hidden selection process, while invisibly ignoring the ones that didn't. The founders you read about, the influencers on your feed, the friend who quit their job and made it work. Those are the planes that came back. Everything you're missing is in the silence. And here's the part that should disturb you. This isn't a small effect. It's the engine driving almost every visible success story you've ever absorbed. In 1973, a paper appeared in Cognitive Psychology, Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, who would later define an entire field. The paper was called Availability, a heuristic for judging frequency and probability, and it described a shortcut your brain runs on every day. You judge how likely or important something is by how easily examples come to mind. Sounds harmless. It is not, because examples don't come to mind based on truth. They come to mind based on visibility. Successful founders write books. Failed founders update their resumes. Successful actors give interviews. Failed actors get other jobs. Successful funds advertise their returns. Failed funds quietly close and disappear from the database entirely. A 1992 study by Brown, Goetzmann, Ibbotson, and Ross in the Review of Financial Studies found that scrubbing dead funds from the historical record inflated reported returns by roughly 2 to 0, 8% every year. Doesn't sound like much. Over 30 years of compounding, it's the difference between a comfortable retirement and a delayed one, and later analyses have pushed the estimate higher. The investor who looks at past performance isn't seeing a fair sample. They're seeing the bombers that came back, lined up in rows, all bullet holes and reassurance. That's layer one. We're roughly a third of the way in, and if you walked out of here knowing only that, you'd already be ahead of most of the people in your industry. But layer one is the cheap version. Here's the thing about survivorship bias that the textbooks understate. It's not a glitch in your perception. Entire industries, entire economies of attention are structured to feed on it. The bias doesn't survive in spite of the modern world. It survives because the modern world rewards it. Walk through any airport bookstore. Every cover is the same. The founder in the hoodie, the dropout who built the unicorn, the 30-year-old who retired early on real estate. Inside the book you get the habits, the morning routine, the philosophy, the 7 principles. What you do not get in any of those books is the millions of people who followed the exact same playbook and ended up bankrupt or just back at their old job a little more tired. And this is not an accident of publishing. In 2003, a researcher named Jerker Denrell published a paper in organization science called Vicarious Learning, Undersampling of Failure, and the Myths of Management. The argument is clean. Most management research has a methodological cancer at its heart. Researchers find a set of successful firms and ask, what do they have in common? They almost never run the mirror study. They almost never go find the failed firms with identical practices. When you only study survivors, even risky practices that are unrelated to performance in the full population, even practices that, on net, make companies less likely to succeed will appear to be positively correlated with success. Because the firms that gambled and lost are no longer in your sample to argue back. The conclusions can never be wrong. They have been pre-filtered to be right. Denrell came back 2 years later in the Harvard Business Review with a follow-up, Selection Bias and the Perils of Benchmarking. The conclusion is the same and somehow more uncomfortable. The entire genre of best practices research, the bedrock of modern consulting, MBA case studies, half the management bookshelf, sits on the same broken sample. The cases are not chosen for what they prove. They're chosen for what they didn't do, which is fail. Layer 2, the self-help industry. A famous coach gathers everyone who succeeded after using their method and puts them on stage. They don't gather the ones who failed. Why would they? The failures don't show up to the seminar. They don't post testimonials. They quietly go quiet. The advice survives. The coach survives. The students who didn't make it don't get a chapter. Quick aside, and I promise it comes back. A few years ago, I was reading a book about a particular kind of trader, chart pattern guy, made a fortune in commodities, sold the system. And the book was good. The system was internally consistent. The reasoning was sharp. I almost adopted it. Then by accident, in a footnote of a different book entirely, I found the name of one of his early students, a guy who had used the same exact system and lost everything. The student wasn't an idiot. He had a math PhD. He'd been disciplined. The system, when you ran it on a larger sample, was a coin flip with a great rider attached, and I had been about to use my own savings to call the coin. The reason the coach got a book and the student got a footnote is the entire subject of this video, and we're not done. Layer 3, your phone. Social media is structurally the most efficient survivorship bias machine ever built. Every fitness influencer with a six-pack is in your feed because the algorithm rewards visibility. Visibility correlates with surviving a brutal selection. Thousands of people with the same genetics, the same workouts, the same discipline who plateaued or got injured or just had less photogenic faces are invisible to you by definition. You're not seeing the average outcome of trying. You're seeing the absolute extreme of a hidden distribution served back to you on a loop as if it were normal. This is not vibes. It's measurable. A 2022 analysis of TikTok and YouTube content distribution found that on TikTok, the top 20% of an account's videos collect 76% of the views, and the single best video is on average 64 times more popular than the median video on the same account. On YouTube, it's 73% and 40 times. The algorithm doesn't show you the artist. It shows you the artist's most accidental hit, magnified, and then shows you the same thing for every other artist. You are looking at an apex pyramid pretending to be a horizon, and then advertising packages it. 5-star reviews, before and after photos, the trader who turned 10,000 into a million, the course graduate who quit their job. None of these are lies, they are survivors. They are being shown to you specifically because the failures will never speak. The marketing isn't broken when it shows you only winners. That is the product. Layer 1, your brain quietly miscounts. Layer 2, an industry was built on the miscount. Layer 3, a software system was built to amplify the industry. Each is more invisible than the last, and we still haven't reached the deepest layer. The deepest layer is the part that explains why none of this can be fixed by paying attention. And here's where it stops being abstract. Career. You study what someone successful did at 24 and you try to reverse engineer the path. What you don't know, what you literally cannot find out from your normal sources, is how many people quit stable jobs to write novels and never got published. How many left engineering to chase music and never broke through. How many took the exact same leap you're considering with the exact same gifts and ended up older and broker and quieter. The path you're admiring is real. The base rate is hidden. Relationships. You take dating advice from couples who lasted 30 years. You don't survey the people who followed identical advice and divorced. The advice survived. The couple survived. So you assume the advice caused the survival. Sometimes it did. Often it didn't. The actual ratio is, by design, unknowable from the inside. Investing. You remember the 2018 Bessembinder study in the Journal of Financial Economics. Just 4% of U.S. stocks created the entire net wealth gain of the stock market between 1926 and 2016. The other 96% collectively performed about as well as short-term treasury bills. So every stock picker telling you about their winning trade is, statistically, a survivor pulled from a small, lucky sample. The thousands who blew up their portfolios using the same strategy, same chart reading, same discipline, same Substack, don't get podcasts. They get day jobs, risk-taking in general. You read a founder's story, quit the job, bet the savings, made it work, and you feel inspired. You're seeing the survivor. The actuarial reality, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics Business Employment Dynamics data, is that around 24% of new businesses fail in their first year and 3% fail within 10. The hero story isn't fake. It's one data point pulled from a graveyard of identical-looking attempts. Now there's a fair objection here. Someone's been waiting to make it. Sure, they'll say, but isn't there some signal in the survivors? Wouldn't you rather take advice from someone who did it than from someone who didn't? And the answer is yes, with a knife edge of asterisks. There is sometimes signal. The problem is you cannot tell signal from noise from inside the sample. If the strategy is high variance, if 100 people tried it and one became a billionaire and 99 became baristas, then the survivor's testimony is evidence the strategy is high variance, not evidence the strategy is good. They are two different claims. The survivor cannot tell you which one their story is. Often, they don't know themselves. I am going to admit something here that you've earned since you've stayed this long. For about 3 years of my own 20s, I followed an investing strategy I had picked up from a person whose results were, on paper, undeniable. The numbers were real. The reasoning was thoughtful. The track record was years long. What I didn't know, what I learned much later when the person stopped publishing, was that they had been one of 7 students of a particular method, and the other 6 had gone bankrupt over the same decade. The strategy was a coin that had been flipped 7 times, and I was being taught by the one-heads. I was lucky. I lost a small amount of money instead of a large amount of it. Most people who get the same lesson don't catch it in time. The lesson cost me a year of savings, and the certainty that I do my homework before I invest was actually protecting me. So, the mistake isn't admiring the survivor. The mistake is using them as evidence for what your own decision is likely to produce. Inspiration without base rates is a coin toss that someone happened to win, repackaged and sold to you as a strategy. And now, step back from your own decisions for a moment. Because here is the part that makes all of this not just an information problem. If we can see this, if we can name it, if we can verify the numbers, if every single field of decision-making has been screaming about this for 50 years, why does nobody act on it? Why do the same people read the same kinds of books next year? Why do you, even after this video, almost certainly slide back into the same way of looking? It's not that you're undisciplined. It's that the fix is not more information. And to see why, we have to go one layer deeper than industry, past the books, past the algorithm, all the way to the inside of your skull. Remember the thing I told you to hold near the start. 300,000 years of ancestors got better at staying alive by watching what worked and copying it. Your brain is running ancient software. The whole thing is built to learn from outcomes you can see. Here's the thing about that software. It was written for an environment that didn't hide its dead. In a hunter-gatherer band, when the hunter didn't come back, you knew there was a funeral. There was an empty mat at the fire. You buried him with the others. The base rate of dangerous hunting was something you couldn't not see. The evolutionary feedback loop copy what survives. Avoid what dies worked because the dying happened in front of you. A 2022 paper in the Journal of Theoretical Biology on the evolution of cognitive biases in human learning makes the architecture clear. Brains were selected to attend to vivid, visible, recent cases, because in an ancestral environment, vivid, visible, recent was a pretty good proxy for important. The snake at your feet is more relevant than a statistical risk estimate of snake bites in the region. The neighbor who choked on a berry yesterday is more relevant than dietary epidemiology. Then, around the printing press, the environment changed. And around the search engine, it changed again. And around the recommendation algorithm, it broke. Because for the first time in human history, the world started to hide its dead at industrial scale. The failed founders don't get a chapter in the airport bookstore. The bankrupt traders don't get a podcast. The 50,000 people who took the influencer's advice and didn't change don't get a before and after photo. The selection process that used to happen in front of your eyes and that your brain was tuned to learn from now happens out of sight. You're using a Stone Age learning system in a curated highlight reel. This is not a moral failing. This is a hardware mismatch. Your pattern recognition is doing exactly what it was built to do. The problem is what you're aiming it at. And this is why the fix is not more information. Because more information doesn't change the hardware. More information will, if anything, give your visible vivid recent system more visible vivid recent material to overweight. The book you read tomorrow to fix survivorship bias is itself, almost certainly, going to be a book that survived pulled from the publishing graveyard for reasons that include, but are not limited to being correct. Quick aside that I owe you. This video is also a survivor. You are watching it because it was, by some combination of luck and execution, surfaced to you. The competing videos that explained this same idea with worse production values or worse titles, or that the algorithm tested on a smaller audience first, are not in front of you. So if at the end of this you find yourself thinking this is the clearest explanation of survivorship bias I've ever seen, please notice that you are reading that thought through the very bias the video is about. The compliment is partly diagnostic. So, if knowledge can't fix this, what can? And this is the most uncomfortable answer in the entire video. The only thing that can move you against survivorship bias reliably and on a schedule is a ritual. A small, deliberately uncomfortable habit you perform on every decision, regardless of how you feel about it. A habit your brain will resist, because the habit is asking your brain to look at evidence that isn't there. A habit that, performed mechanically and often, manually inserts the data your evolved cognition cannot. The good news is, after 50 years of research, we know what most of those rituals look like. That was the theory. Here is the practice. Ritual 1, the base rate question. Every time a success story is offered to you as evidence, ask one question before you draw any inference at all. Out of how many? If a coaching program shows you 10 people who got rich, ask how many bought the program. If it's 10 out of 10,000, the success rate is 0, 1%. The story is true. The strategy is a lottery dressed as a method. You're not asking this to be cynical. You're asking it because your brain physically cannot supply the denominator on its own. The denominator is the missing planes, and you have to drag them up by hand. Ritual 2, the graveyard interview. Once per major decision, once per career change, once per investment, once per business, go find someone who tried the same thing and failed. Not to be discouraged. To complete the dataset your brain refuses to complete. Their story will be less dramatic. They will be harder to find. They will be more useful than anyone who succeeded. If you cannot find a failure to talk to, that is itself a data point. It likely means the failures have been deliberately filtered out of your view. Ritual 3, the pre-mortem. Gary Klein wrote about this in the Harvard Business Review in September 2007, and the technique is criminally underused. Before you start a project, before any major decision, sit down and assume it has already failed. Write down in present tense what went wrong. Klein found with real teams that this exercise can roughly double the number of risks the team identifies, compared to ordinary risk planning. It works for one reason. It is the only way to force your visible data system to retrieve evidence that doesn't exist yet. You are preloading the missing planes into the conversation. Ritual 4, the falsification check. When you consume advice, a book, a podcast, a mentor, ask one question after. What evidence, if it existed, would prove this advice wrong? If nothing could, you're not learning. You're being inducted into a survivor's mythology. Falsifiability is the line between knowledge and folklore, and in the age of testimonial-driven content, the line keeps moving. You will notice these are not insights, they are chores. That is the point. Survivorship bias cannot be defeated with cleverness, because the cleverness is the thing being fooled. It can only be defeated by friction, the small, scheduled, slightly annoying habit of asking the question your brain doesn't want to ask. The planes that came back were never the lesson. Wald's gift wasn't a formula. It was a habit of mind. Every visible win is a partial data set. Every confident piece of advice is evidence from the survivors. Every algorithm-served example is the tip of a hidden iceberg the size of a civilization. Your brain cannot fix this on its own, and that's not your fault. Your brain was tuned for a world that didn't have publishing contracts, recommendation engines, or seven-figure courses. You are using a Stone Age learning system in an environment that has industrialized the hiding of failure. The work every day is to manually insert what the world refuses to show you. The base rates, the graveyards, the pre-mortems, the falsification. The decisions you'll be proudest of if you live long enough to look back are probably going to be the ones where you noticed the silence, where you asked the question nobody else asked, where you respected the data that wasn't there. I'll leave you with one question, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments because it'll shape the next video. What is one belief you currently hold about your own life that you suspect is built on planes that came back? I'm going to read every answer. The next video in this series goes one step further at the political version of this same bias, which is the reason dictators keep coming back through history, and the reason the most dangerous advice in any society tends to be the advice that survived a purge. Until then, ask the question, and I'll see you in the next one.